Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video, we've got our first piece of Scourge coverage on the real hard facts, finding out how to make this thing profitable and insane. And it's fair to say it doesn't disappoint. Just as we predicted, the Scourge maps are completely insane, and they yield absolutely incredible results, and acquiring them is well within everyone's reach, and it makes running Scourges very, very rewarding in your maps. Of course, you need a bit of know-how to do that, and we'll be covering that in a little bit in today's video and further on, but this one's just a little bit of a teaser to whet the appetite with the initial discoveries. So I spent today testing mainly Scourge and just chilling out, recovering a bit, also dealing with a bit of construction work, meaning I couldn't stream. But in general, we mainly did Scourge today, trying to figure things out. And as you can see here in the background, we have a bit of footage. This is a T1 map, which had been baked 8 times, which I purchased off another player for 35 chaos. I was kind of shocked that this person actually sold it to me. I'd bought a few other Scarab maps before this to kind of test the waters and really kind of find out, how good these things are. But I kind of did the math and I was like, there's no way this thing should be worth 35C. And I bought it off him and I was pretty damn right. So let's just go over the Scarab to see in the background here, because there's quite a lot of interesting stuff at work here. So this map, I think it drops an additional unique, and it drops 4 Scarabs off of the rare monsters, which you're seeing in here. Now, the interesting thing about the Scarabs, though, is that their rarity, the Gilded, Polished, and Rusted, their rarity isn't weighted. So you can drop a ton of Gilded Scarabs in Tier 1 maps, which is pretty damn crazy. You can see here that there's a bunch of really good Scarabs dropping all over the place. And I think it's fair to say that this map was probably created pretty ad hoc, just by a random player just getting into maps. So a random player in T1 maps was able to generate this much value. It's unfortunate that he didn't realize he had that and do it himself to get the money. But in the end, he was able to generate this value, and you guys could be generating this value too. So overall, of course, the Scarabs are insane. Let's talk a little bit about the actual maps in general and how they kind of shake out. So there's a number of incredibly powerful mods, obviously Scarabs being one of them. And after talking with Firegrass and spreadsheeting a little bit, it's about a 20 to 32% chance, somewhere in that ballpark, of getting a good Scourge modifier on your Scourge maps. And there's quite a few things at work here to kind of determine what you're going to be getting. But I think the Scarab specifically is a 2.5% chance to roll. But there's also a ton of other good stuff like stacked decks, fossils, and all sorts of stuff like that. Which makes it quite enticing. So obviously the better rolls are rare, but there's definitely a lot of good stuff to go around, and there's plenty of stuff to sink your teeth into. So after testing quite a few Scourge maps, which I was buying off other players, I found out that there's generally anywhere between 10 to 20 rare mobs in a reasonable layout that you're able to full clear. And by full clear, I mean really full clear, like every nook and cranny, sweeping it up and kind of taking a look all around. So in this map here, we got 10 rares because, it's obviously not a favorable layout, but I did a laboratory of all maps, and I got 18 rares. Actually, I think it was 19 rares. Yeah, 19 rares. So it's pretty interesting. I'm not sure if that's just variance or if there's some sort of, black magic at work here, but I think that there's going to be an ideal layout that everyone's going to be wanting to run and bake. I'm not sure what that layout is yet, but there's just so many layers and the mechanic goes so deep, and there's just so much to min-max here that we will find out eventually, but there's really a lot going on here. It's way more than anything in any other league, and I think that's why it's taking a little bit of time to kind of get there. Anyway, it's fair to say that it's very rewarding. So the other thing I wanted to cover is actually in-game here. If you guys are interested, I got 40 Scarabs from this. We'll jump into game here and I'll show you guys. I just run the map here. This is the amount of Scarabs I got from a 35C investment in a T1 map. Alright, so there's a few things I want to cover here. So when you Scourge a map in your Crucible, it basically rolls a modifier. It's going to roll 1 beneficial and 1 negative modifier. Every single time it has to roll this, it will generally always give you this. And if you guys are interested, we'll have way more detail on all of the information with this further on. This is just the taster. So you can see here, this one says additional maps and influenced items. This one says here gems and experience as well as rarity. And I think this one, yeah, so it's basically always going to give you, like if it's a tier 4, it's going to give you 4 rewards and also 4 negative mods. Okay, so why is this important? So when you initially roll your Scourge map, you go from a normal kind of map to a Scourge map, it's going to give you a reward. And that reward has some form of weight to it. So when you're Scourging it up, you'll notice that when you're upgrading Scourged maps, for some reason it seems to favor upgrading the existing modifiers and then adding a new one later on, and then trying to even it out. So basically what this means is if you Scourge a map and you roll like lab enchants, it may actually be worth tossing that aside and Scourging a new map, because then you can seed that map with a new reward, and if it rolls scarabs or something like that, then you can commit to it and upgrade it to 10, and then it's going to have that committed to it because you have a way higher chance of upgrading the scarab mod on there to like 4 or 5 scarabs. Instead of just 1, as opposed to, you know, rolling scarabs, hard rolling it on a map which already has like lab enchants or something like that. So there's going to be a very interesting metagame around this. I haven't really figured it out yet, exactly how it's going to work, but you know, on Scourge maps, there's tons of insane stuff, and you might want to be fishing for it. Okay, so let's talk about how to generate these things so you guys can get your teeth stuck in and start testing yourself. So when me and Firegrass were testing, we kind of did a lot of maps, and when you're in a map, like a high tier map, I was doing Wharf, T16 Wharf, I was getting around 50,000 to 60,000 corruption per map I was doing, and I was getting up to around 240 Crucible stacks, which is the debuff up here. Now, the amount of juice you get is pretty much directly linked to the amount of stacks you have. Because, you know, killing monsters yields the stacks, and obviously killing monsters also yields the corruption, which is very, very important. Slaying more monsters is going to be better. Now, it's important to note that the only thing that seems to give corruption on the Scourge stuff in the Crucible is the Scourge mobs themselves. So juicing with Breach, with Deli, and anything else like that isn't going to help. And in most cases, it's just going to slow you down and make it so you're not Scourging maps as fast. So in most cases, this is actually not how we initially predicted it as a more multiplier on maps. It can be in some cases like Empyreans, but for most solo players, it's actually something you want to do independent of juicing for the most part. So I wouldn't actually be putting Deli Orbs on these myself, as the rewards are more from the actual Scourge rares themselves than the actual like kind of raw drops from the map, which is pretty interesting there. So overall, how long does it take to get a T1 of Scourging? So on a lower tier map, it actually is very, very quickly. So if you put a T1 map in here, for example, so let me just fish out a T1 map real quick. We got an estuary, we'll chuck that in the Crucible. You can see the amount required here is 83,929. Okay, so let me change this around a little bit and put a T16 map in here. We'll put this Necropolis in, and we'll chuck that in there in the furnace here. So now you can see it's 120,000. So it's pretty interesting, and the fact is that T1 maps are actually much faster than the Scourge, 50% faster in fact, than the ones over here, the T16s. Now, this is a pretty interesting scenario because the rewards, so far from what I can see, with the exception of stuff like influence modifiers and stuff like that, like influence items, and maps, are actually the same. You can see me getting a ton of Gilded Scarabs. This is about the weightings of normal, you know, like T16 Deli Scarab kind of rewards. It doesn't seem to be weighted. So the strategy might actually be to generate corruption in T16 maps and run your normal maps, and use T1 maps because they're faster to Scourge and to fish for mods with. Which is very interesting indeed. And actually, another interesting point for you guys is it seems, again, none of this is concrete yet, we've just done some preliminary testing. It seems that the amount of corruption yielded is actually the same in T1 maps as it is in T16 maps. And it actually also shows that you can see here on this T16 map that you can actually Scourge T16 maps in T1 maps. So there's tons of different combinations of strategies you can do here. You can Scourge up your T1 map faster while you're doing your T16 maps and your normal Atlas strats. You can Scourge up a T16 map in really easy content, and then, you know, you can do that later on if you want, or sell it to another player. There's tons of things at work here. There's just so many interesting and so many different ways that you could take this mechanic and kind of do stuff with it, that it's very, very interesting to try and figure out what is actually going to be the best way. Now, another few other tidbits here. I have been, you know, sussing out some other streamers, and I have noticed that some people have 3 Crucible slots for equipment. I'm wondering if there's a 3rd Crucible slot for maps. If that is the case, well, you're going to be able to pretty much juice up maps constantly and almost run Scourge maps chained for the most part, because, you know, overall you're just getting so much juice from the corruption, which is pretty interesting. Okay, now I want to teach you guys a pretty interesting technique, which it's kind of borderline, but there's something called shift spamming that you can do, Scourged shift spamming. And this is basically how you exceed the normal amount of Scourged stacks you'd be able to get in a map. So it's pretty difficult to crack 200, and it's very difficult to crack like 230 or 240. And I was getting 240 pretty consistently on the maps I was running in Wolf. And the way you do that is because when you actually shift into the Scourge dimension, you actually get a big pack of mobs, and that can actually include rare monsters, which is very relevant when you're running Scourge maps. You want to be shift spamming as much as possible to get additional rare packs. But anyway, the point here is though that these packs do yield corruption, and they also do yield stacks of the debuff, which is very, very important. So basically, the strategy is that you do like a map like Valor's Rest or something like that, and the way I do it is that when I get to the actual Harbinger on the map, I will literally spam my Scourge key over and over again to shift in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, and it'll spawn a new pack every single time. And that just turbocharges your stack counter to the moon. But obviously to do this, you need a reasonably strong build that can clear the rest of the map without relying on the Harbinger for the rest of the bar. And it also does seem like there's some form of a soft cap to the shift spamming, because you can't just shift spam all the time and get a pack. It only seems like it's in certain cases that it gives the pack. I haven't completely nailed that down yet. But it's fairly interesting, and there's just so many just little intricacies that I'm just so curious about and have to test. But it's fair to say that I haven't been focusing on currency at all. I've just been so enamored by the mechanic and trying to figure it out. It's definitely a rewarding one, and there's definitely going to be a metagame around figuring out which map is best to Scourge up. We've done lots of testing so far. There's definitely maps which are complete F tier, like Plateau, for example. If you try and run that, it's not going to have anywhere near as much as you do in a Wharf or an Underground Sea, for example. It's all about getting a high stack counter for generating the corruption to Scourge your maps up as fast as possible. But then on the flip side, there's always also going to be a meta on which Scourge map actually has the most rares in it. I'm not sure which one that is yet, but once we do find that, that's going to turbocharge the rewards from Scourge maps as well. Because as I mentioned, in the Haunted Mansion, I got 10 maps, 10 rares. But in the laboratory, I got 18. It's also unclear whether like pack size affects these things or anything like that. There's just so much damn stuff to test. But once we know it all, I think that Scourge well and truly is going to live up to the hype. It's a little bit of a shame about their equipment. It's a little bit, on the underwhelming side, but it's fair to say the maps definitely deliver. They are very rewarding, and there's tons of stuff to try, and it's very, very interesting. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little tester and this taster, and you tune in and sub for more if you're interested in more Scourge min-maxing, and it's fair to say we're just getting started. So until next time, I'll see you guys then. Cheers.